Practical Mental Influence and Mental Fascination by William Walker Atkinson, Chicago, 1908. 8. Influencing at a distance. Exerting mental influence upon others at a distance, how the mental currents flow to a distance, how distant treatments are given, the occult practices are given, a number of the most effective methods are given, with particulars of practice. In the 2 preceding chapters, we invited your consideration of the manifestation of mental influence when the user or projector of the force was in actual contact with, or in presence of, the person or persons he was aiming to influence. In this chapter, and the one immediately following it, we shall pass to a consideration of the manifestation of the influence when the persons affected are removed in space from the person using the influence. The general public are familiar in a general way with the phenomena of hypnotism, and to a lesser degree with the phenomena of fascination and its more common forms of personal magnetism, etc. But as regards the use of the influence at a distance, people are more or less skeptical, owing to a lack of knowledge of the subject. And still, every day is bringing to the mind of the public new facts and instances of such influence, and the teaching of the various cults along these lines is now awakening a new interest in the subject, and a desire to learn something regarding the laws and principles underlying the same. As strange as it may appear at first glance, the principles underlying mental influence at a distance are precisely the same as those underlying the use of the influence when the persons are in the presence of each other. A little thought must show the truth of this. In the case of present influence, the mental currents flow across an intervening space between the 2 minds. There is a space outside of the 2 minds to be traversed by the currents. And a moment's thought will show you that the difference between present influence and distant influence is merely a matter of degree, a question of little more or less space to be traversed by the currents. Do you see this plainly? Well then, this being so, it follows that the methods used must be identical. Of course, in the case of personal influence, the added effect of the voice, manner, suggestive methods, the eye, etc. are present, which render the result more easily obtained, and causes the rapport condition to be more easily established. But with this exception, the methods are identical, and even the advantages accruing from the exceptions mentioned may be duplicated by practice and development in the case of distant influence. There are a number of methods given by the authorities in this matter of distant influencing, but they are all based upon the same principles named in the previous chapters of this book, i.e., vibrations, thought waves, mental induction, concentration, and mental imaging. In these words you have the key to the subject. The rest is all a matter of practice and development and variation. One of the most elementary, and yet one of the most effective methods known to occultists is that of creating a mental image of the person treated, for that is the common term among modern writers on the subject, in the sense of imagining him to be seated in a chair in front of the person treating him at a distance. The treator proceeds to give both verbal commands and at the same time directs thought waves towards the imaginary person seated before him. This process establishes a psychic connection between the treator and the actual person, although the latter may be removed from the treator by many miles of space. This was the method of the ancient magicians and wonder-workers, and has always been a favorite among persons pursuing these experiments, or desirous of mentally influencing others at a distance. A variation of the above, very common in former days, was to mold a clay or wax figure, calling it by the name of the person treated, and identifying it in the mind and imagination with the other person. A variation is also noticed in the cases where a photograph, lock of hair, article of clothing, etc. is used in this way as a psychic connecting link between the 2 persons. The practitioners of black magic, witchcraft, and other nefarious perversions of mental influence seem to prefer these methods, although, on the contrary, they are used with the very best results by many in giving beneficial treatments to absent patients, friends, and others whose welfare is desired. The only effect the mental image of the person, or the picture, etc. has, is the fact that by these means a psychic connecting link is set up along which the thought waves travel more readily. In the above forms of treatment, the treator treats the mental image, picture, etc. precisely as he would if the person were actually present. He forgets for the time being that the person may be hundreds of miles away, and concentrates his influence on the image or picture, etc., because the latter is really the starting point of the psychic chain which leads direct to the person. The treater sends his thought waves towards the object, and in some cases actually talks mentally to the person by means of the medium mentioned. He may give commands, arguments, remonstrances, persuasion, etc., just as if the person were actually present. In short, he acts as if the person were sitting before him, wide awake, and receptive to his influence. Another way, employed by some, is to begin darting thought waves towards the other person, forming in the imagination a gradually lengthening psychic wire composed of thought vibrations. Those practicing this form state that when the psychic wire is projected sufficiently far, and it travels with incredible speed, and comes in contact with the mind of the other person, the treator feels at once that contact has been established by a peculiar faint shock, similar to that of a very mild galvanic current. Then the treator proceeds to send his thought currents along the psychic wire in the same manner as if the person were actually in his presence, as described under the heading of Fascination in a preceding chapter. In fact, such treatment, and the others mentioned in this chapter, are really and practically long-distance fascination. Another form of distant treatment consists in forming the astral tube mentioned in other books of the series. The astral tube is set up in a similar manner to the psychic wire and projected toward the person desired to influence. It is formed in the imagination as a vortex ring, similar to the little ring of smoke puffed out by a cigar smoker, only larger, about 6 inches to 1 foot wide, or better still, like the ring of smoke ejected from the stack of a locomotive, sometimes when it is puffing rapidly. This vortex ring is then seen in the imagination by the use of the will to lengthen out in the shape of a tube which rapidly extends and travels towards the person treated in a manner identical with that of a psychic wire. This tube is known to occultists as the astral tube, and is employed in various forms of occult and psychic phenomena, such as clairvoyance and other forms of psychomancy, as described by us in our volume of the series so entitled. Those following this method of distance influencing report that they recognize the completion of the tube by a sensation of stoppage and a feeling of rapport having been established between themselves and the other person. In some cases they report that they are able to faintly see the figure of the other person in miniature at the other end of the tube, but this is undoubtedly due to the possession of a psychomantic powers, suddenly awakened into effect. The tube once established, the treatment is proceeded with it as if it were in the actual presence of the person treated. In many respects, the psychic wire and the astral tube methods are similar, and a statement concerning one is generally true of the other. There are 2 other methods frequently used in distance influencing, which we shall now briefly describe. The first of these 2 methods consists in sitting or standing in a quiet space, or rather in some place in which you can concentrate. The advanced occultist can find peace in the midst of the noise, and then directing your thought waves towards the other person, forming in the imagination a mental picture of the force flying from you towards the other, like tiny sparks of electricity or of a subtle fluid. This mental picture tends to give a concentrative force to the current, which renders them powerful and sends them direct to the desired spot. The second of these 2 methods is that used by the most advanced occultists who have advanced beyond the use of the methods described just now. These people simply stand or sit quietly and concentrate their minds until they attain the state of mental calm known to many as the silence. Then they create a strong mental picture of the person treated, surrounded by the conditions desired to be created, or doing the things desired to be done. This is one of the highest forms of mental influence, and really approaches a higher phase of influence than that of the mental plane as generally known. A picture of a person held in the mind in this way, the person being seen in perfect robust health, and happy and successful, tends to materialize the same conditions in the person in real life. This form of treatment, however, is possible only to those of great concentration, and who have mastered the act of mental imaging, and who also possess creative willpower to a marked degree. Some degree of success in it, however, is open to nearly every student who practices along these lines. Before practicing any of these experiments, read what we have said in the chapter on Magic, Black and White, and guard against employing the power for evil purposes, for the fate of the black magician is a sad one.